This is a fictional story inspired by real life. The wooden bench groaned as Arthur Vance let himself fall onto its splintered surface, a sound that seemed to echo the internal collapse of his entire world. The suit he wore was the same bespoke charcoal wool he had donned for the signing of the largest contract of his life, only 3 mornings ago, but now it was stained with grease, London dust, and a darkness he preferred not to name. His hands were trembling, not from the biting chill of the Thames wind, but from a hollow void that had opened in his chest where his heart used to beat with pride. Before him, King's Cross Station roared with its eternal uncaring movement, a sea of commuters, tourists, and dreamers who moved past him without a single glance. Hundreds of people crossed the grey stone floors, none of them stopping to ask why a man in a 1,000-pound suit looked like he had been dragged through the very gutters of the city. For the world, Arthur Vance had already ceased to exist, becoming just another shadow in the corner of a grand terminal. He closed his eyes for a fleeting second, smelling the ghost of expensive leather and imported Arabica coffee, the scent of the office that was no longer his. When he opened them again, there was only the gray pavement and a pigeon pecking at a stray crumb near his scuffed shoes. Arthur Vance, former chairman of the Vance and Lawson Group, repeated his name in a low whisper, as if saying it aloud could conjure back the towers he once commanded. It returned nothing but the sound of a departing train. He reached into his inner pocket, feeling the cold weight of a gold watch, a piece handed down from his father who had received it from his grandfather. It was a small fortune in gold and history, yet sitting on this bench, it was merely a piece of metal that couldn't even buy him the dignity of being seen. "Excuse me, sir, do you have a spare pound?" A tired, gravelly voice drifted toward him. Arthur looked up to see an old man in a frayed coat, holding out a stained paper cup, his face a map of long winters and hard luck. The old man looked at Arthur, really looked at him, and then his eyes changed from hope to a strange, weary recognition. He pulled his cup back, shaking his head slowly, and walked away without asking for anything more. It was at that moment that Arthur understood the true depth of his fall. Even those who lived on the charity of others no longer saw him as someone who could give. A sharp, mocking laugh suddenly cut through the humid air of the station, causing Arthur's body to tense before his mind could even process the familiar tone. He knew that voice too well, for it had been the soundtrack to his success and his ultimate betrayal. Frederick Lawson stepped toward the bench with a smile that Arthur had. For 15 years mistaken for loyalty and brotherhood. Frederick looked impeccable in a navy Italian suit, a new platinum watch glinting on his wrist, and his hair slicked back so perfectly that not even the London wind dared to disturb it. On his arm, laughing softly at some private joke, was Catherine, the woman who had been Arthur's wife until 48 hours ago. Catherine looked at him as one looks at a discarded piece of litter on the pavement. There was no hatred in her eyes, which would have been easier to bear, only a profound and cold discomfort. "Frederick, let's keep moving," she whispered, her voice like ice on a window pane. "We are going to be late for the lunch reservation at the Shard." But Frederick did not move. Instead, he pulled an expensive smartphone from his pocket and pointed it directly at Arthur's face. "Wait, Kathy, the world needs to see this," he said, his teeth flashing in a grin that was predatory. "The great Arthur Vance, the man who told me I was nothing without his brilliance. Look at you now, brother. Just look at you." Arthur's voice came out hoarse, a jagged sound that felt like it was tearing his throat. "Enough, Frederick. Just go." Frederick let out a clean, sharp laugh that drew the attention of several passing travelers. "How many times did you tell me enough when I asked you to listen to my ideas in the boardroom? How many times did you silence me in front of the investors? I remember every single second, Arthur. I remember it all." A small crowd began to gather, the magnetic pull of a public tragedy proving too strong for the hurried commuters. A few teenagers held up their phones, recording the scene with a detached curiosity. Arthur heard the murmurs from the edges of the circle. That's Vance, isn't it? The one from the news yesterday. The one who lost the whole company. Arthur lowered his head, not out of shame, but because of the crushing confirmation that nothing he owned, not even his privacy, belonged to him anymore. Frederick crouched down in front of him, close enough that Arthur could smell the expensive cologne he had once recommended to him. The phone was inches from his face, capturing the contrast between the victor and the vanquished. I told you, Arthur. I told you 1,000 times that without Lawson there is no Vance. You believed you were the genius, and now you're sitting on a bench with oil stains on your lapel. Do you know what? I'm going to do something charitable for you. Frederick reached into his pocket and pulled out a single-pound coin. He let it drop, and it clattered against the stone, bouncing twice before coming to rest near Arthur's worn shoe. For your morning coffee, Frederick said, standing up and smoothing his jacket. Enjoy the rest of your day, brother. Catherine was already walking away, her heels clicking a rhythmic, final goodbye against the station floor. Frederick followed her, showing her the video he had just recorded, their laughter mingling with the announcements of arriving trains. A teenager stepped forward and filmed Arthur's face for a few more seconds before moving on. A young woman leaned in just to take a selfie with the fallen tycoon in the background, giggling with her friend as they disappeared into the crowd. Arthur Vance, who until 3 nights ago had signed contracts worth 9 figures, remained alone on the bench, staring at that single coin on the ground. He did not pick it up. To pick it up would be to accept that this was now the full measure of his value. He closed his eyes again, breathing in the cold air, feeling as though something deep inside his soul had cracked in the silence. Sir? The voice was tiny, so fragile that at first Arthur thought he was imagining it amidst the roar of the station. Sir, you look very sad. Arthur opened his eyes to find a small girl with loose golden curls and a pink ribbon in her hair standing directly in front of him. She looked at him with the kind of enormous, unfiltered eyes that only children possess before they learn that the world can be broken. Beside her stood another girl, identical in every way, same dress, same ribbon, same earnest expression. The twins were very small, perhaps no more than 5 years old, holding hands as they stood their ground. One was slightly taller, while the shorter one clutched a battered blue notebook against her chest. The notebook was covered in layers of clear tape to keep its frayed edges from falling apart, its corners curled from years of being opened and closed by small, hurried hands. I am fine, little ones, Arthur managed to say, his voice cracking like dry parchment. Go back to your mother, please. But the girls didn't move. But you're crying, said the one with the notebook, tilting her head with a look of pure, honest concern. I'm not crying, Arthur lied, though he felt the stinging heat behind his eyelids. Yes, you are, the second girl insisted with that gentle stubbornness unique to children. Mummy says that when someone's eyes are that shiny, they are crying on the inside, where no one can see. Arthur felt something that had been hardened since long before his fall began to fracture. What are your names? He asked, more to stop the trembling in his throat than out of genuine curiosity. I'm Grace, said the one with the notebook. And I'm Hope, said the other. But everyone gets us confused, Grace added with a serious nod. Mummy never does, though, Hope corrected. Mummy always knows who is who. They both nodded in unison with a gravity that made Arthur smile for the first time in 72 hours. It was a small, fragile smile, almost like a muscle cramp. But it was real. Grace, the one holding the notebook, took a step forward. She reached into the small pocket of her dress and pulled out a single strawberry hard candy, its wrapper a bit wrinkled from being carried around. She held it out to him with a steady hand. Here, take this, so you won't be sad anymore. Arthur looked at the candy, then at the girl, then back at the candy. Until that morning, his world had been constructed of 9-digit figures, ironclad contracts, and signatures that opened vaults. Now, A small child was offering him a strawberry candy because she thought he was sad. It was by far the most expensive thing anyone had given him in his entire life. It took him a full moment to find the strength to stretch out his hand and receive it. When he did, his fingers brushed against Grace's. They were small, warm, and slightly sticky. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Grace." "And thank you to me, too," Hope protested, wrinkling her nose in a mock pout. "Yes, thank you to you, too, Hope," Arthur replied, feeling a strange warmth spreading through his chest. "We were going to split it," Hope explained, "but you looked much sadder than us. Children!" The voice that cut through the air now was not cruel like Frederick's. It was the voice of a woman, a mother, and it carried the distinct, sharp edge of maternal fear that comes when a child wanders off in a public place. "Grace! Hope! Come here right now!" A woman came running toward the bench, her face pale. She wore a faded blue cleaning uniform with a name tag that Arthur couldn't quite read. Her hands were red from cold water and harsh chemicals, and her hair was pulled back in a hurried, practical bun. She looked like a woman who started her day long before the sun rose and finished it long after it set. She reached the bench, breathing heavily, and immediately took a hand of each twin, shielding them with her own body as she looked at the man on the bench. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized him. She stood perfectly still for a second, her hand tightening slightly on Hope's shoulder. Something in her eyes flickered, like a strong wind blowing through a closed house. "I'm sorry, sir," she finally said, her eyes dropping to the ground. "The girls didn't mean to bother you." "They didn't bother me," Arthur responded, his voice still thick. There was a silence that lasted too long, a silence where the woman seemed to be debating whether to speak or run. That single second of hesitation told Arthur more than any conversation could. "Come along, my loves," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mummy has to get back to work." "But Mummy," Grace began. "We gave him the candy. Now, Grace, please." The mother turned around, pulling the twins away gently. They followed her without further argument, but Grace turned back one last time. She was still clutching the blue notebook against her chest, and she lifted it slightly as if showing it to him, a silent goodbye. "Mummy," she said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "Mummy, he's the man from the drawing." The mother froze mid-step. "What are you talking about, darling?" "The man from the drawing, Mummy. The one Daddy drew." Hope nodded behind her with the same solemnity. "It's him, Mummy. It's the same face." The woman in the cleaning uniform closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her face was hardened by something that wasn't anger. It was an old, deep-seated fear that she knew all too well. "Let's go," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. "Let's go now, girls." She pulled them both at the same time, moving quickly toward the service entrance of the station. In the rush, Grace stumbled, and the blue notebook slipped from her arms. It hit the stone floor, splaying open and revealing pages covered in sketches and tight, neat handwriting. "My notebook!" the girl cried out. "Later, Grace. I'll buy you another one." "But it's Daddy's," I said later. The mother practically carried the girls away, disappearing into the crowd before Arthur could even stand up. Hope looked back over her shoulder and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," without a sound. The blue notebook remained on the floor, abandoned. Arthur Vance, his breathing now shallow and fast, stood up from the bench. His legs felt heavy as if he hadn't moved them in decades. He walked the 3 steps to the notebook and knelt to pick it up. The open page showed a pencil drawing, done with the steady, skilled hand of an adult who knew how to capture a likeness. It was a man in a suit and tie, with a round face and tired eyes. It was Arthur's face. Underneath the drawing, in small, careful script, someone had written, "The man who saved my life. One day my daughters will say thank you for me." Below the sentence was a date Arthur recognized instantly. It was the date Many years ago, when a young, unknown man had knocked on his office door asking for a job. Arthur's hands began to shake with a renewed intensity, not from the cold or hunger, but from a realization that felt like an electric current. "It can't be," he whispered to the empty air. He turned the page, and another, and another. There were more drawings, more phrases, and technical diagrams that looked out of place in a child's notebook. On the margin of one page, written in the same careful hand, were 5 words that made Arthur's blood run cold. "If something happens to me, Lawson." Arthur felt the very pavement shift beneath his feet. He looked up at the crowd, searching for the blue uniform, but the woman and the girls were long gone. Until 5 minutes ago, Arthur Vance believed he had lost everything in his life. He had just discovered that he had spent years not knowing what he had truly lost. He stood up with great effort, his bones feeling as heavy as lead, but he held the notebook with both hands as if it were the only anchor he had left in the world. He walked toward the side entrance, the station smelling of cheap coffee and cold metal. People looked at him with that mixture of fleeting pity and impatient haste. "Wait," he muttered. "Please wait." But the cleaning woman had vanished through one of those service doors that the public never notices, the doors behind which the hidden city of the station operated. Arthur entered without permission, ignoring a security guard who shouted something after him. He walked down a narrow, dimly lit corridor, the blue notebook pressed against his chest like a sacred relic. He passed a utility closet and a cart of cleaning supplies, but the woman wasn't there. He turned another corner, then another, and finally heard the muffled sounds of a conversation. "Mummy, why are we running?" It was Hope's voice. "Because, Mummy," Grace added. The man was sad. "Listen to me, girls." The mother's voice was strained, echoing in the small space. "Don't ever talk to strangers again. Do you understand me? Please, never." The voices were coming from a small break room at the end of the hall. Arthur approached slowly, the door slightly ajar. He saw the woman kneeling in front of her daughters, adjusting a crooked ribbon on Grace's hair. Her hands were red, her face washed, with a fatigue that seemed to go down to her soul. Arthur stood in the doorway, his presence casting a long shadow. "Ma'am," he said, his voice breaking. She stood up as if she had heard a clap of thunder, moving instantly between Arthur and the girls, her hands outspread to protect them. "Get out of here," she said, her voice low but forged in iron. "Leave right now." "I only want to return this," Arthur said, holding up the notebook. "Your daughter dropped it. Leave it there and go. Please, I said leave." Her hands were shaking now, her eyes wide with terror. "Please, don't come any closer." Arthur carefully placed the notebook on a rickety wooden chair near the door. The twins peered out from behind their mother's legs, Grace peeking her head out to give him a small, hesitant wave. The mother pulled her back. "That drawing," Arthur whispered, "that drawing is me." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, the anger had been replaced by a weary, ancient fear. "Please," she said in a broken plea, "please don't get them involved in this." "They are just children." "Involved in what, ma'am?" Arthur asked, genuinely confused. She opened her mouth, then closed it, rubbing her forehead with a trembling hand. "In whatever it is you are doing here, whatever you came to find, I have nothing to do with it. My daughters have nothing to do with it. I just clean and go home. That's all. I'm not looking for trouble." "Carter!" The voice that cut into the conversation came from the hallway, heavy and cold. A woman appeared in the doorway wearing a gray supervisor's jacket, an ID badge dangling from her neck. She had the dry, pinched face of someone who had made a career out of being unpleasant. Lily, the woman in the cleaning uniform, shrank back before turning around. "Yes, Mrs. Higgins? What is this man doing in the service area? Are you chatting with customers during your shift again? Do I need to explain the rules to you one more time?" "No, Mrs. Higgins, he was just." And you have the children in here? I told you last week no children in the service areas. We've discussed this. The twins huddled together, hope biting her lip. Mrs. Higgins, I had no one to leave them with today. My neighbor is ill, and that is not my problem, Carter. My problem is that you are here to work, and if you can't, there are 100 women outside waiting for your job. Arthur felt a surge of something hot rising from his stomach to his throat. It wasn't hunger. It was a righteous anger he hadn't felt in a long time, the anger of witnessing a small, gratuitous, domestic cruelty. "Excuse me, ma'am," Arthur said, turning toward the supervisor. "Who do you think you are?" Mrs. Higgins turned toward him, as if seeing him for the first time, her eyes scanning him from top to bottom. She saw the stained suit, the unpolished shoes, and the 3-day beard. "You need to leave. This is a restricted area. Passengers aren't allowed here, and we have enough trouble with people sleeping outside as it is." A few other workers poked their heads into the room, whispering and snickering. "Ma'am," Arthur insisted, regaining a flicker of his old authority, "I was simply returning something this woman's daughter dropped. I was not chatting." "I didn't ask for your explanation, sir. Leave now." Lily gave Arthur a rapid, pleading look with her eyes, a silent scream for him to go before things got worse. "Please leave," she mouthed. Arthur stepped back, then another, but before he could cross the threshold, a new voice arrived. A voice that made the air in the room feel thin and expensive. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Frederick Lawson was standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, that same mocking smile playing on his lips. "Arthur Vance in the janitor's closet," he said loudly enough to be heard down the hall. "I told you, brother, you'd learn to find your place. And look at you, you've already started." Mrs. Higgins looked at Frederick with a sudden oily respect, sensing the power and the money that radiated from him. Lily retreated further into the corner, the twins clinging to her uniform. Frederick entered the room without being invited, making himself at home. "And you, ma'am," he said to the supervisor, pulling an embossed business card from his wallet. "I appreciate your diligence. I am the new chairman of the Vance and Lawson Group. If this man ever enters public or private property associated with our interests again, call me personally. I will know how to handle it. He is merely a fallen man trying to take advantage of humble people. He's dangerous, you understand? Especially around women and small children." Lily turned pale, her grip on her daughters tightening. Frederick looked Arthur in the eyes, and this time the smile vanished. His face became a mask of pure, cold malice. "I'll promise you one thing, Arthur, and I'll promise it here in front of everyone, so you can't say you weren't warned." He pulled out his phone and hit record. "I am going to make sure your name disappears. I won't stop until the last newspaper in this country writes that you never existed. And if you think your salvation will come from a cleaning lady and her 2 brats, you are more deluded than I thought. Do you hear me, brother?" He stopped the recording, tucked the phone away, and gave a curt nod to Mrs. Higgins. "Have a good day, Supervisor. You too, Mrs. Carter." He walked out, his expensive shoes clicking away down the hall. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Mrs. Higgins looked at Lily with narrowed eyes, then at Arthur, then at the blue notebook on the chair. "Carter," she said, her voice like a whip. "Yes, Mrs. Higgins? Finish your shift and then come to the personnel office before you go home. Mrs. Higgins, please, finish your shift." The supervisor walked out, leaving Arthur standing there, unsure of where to put his own body. Lily grabbed the notebook with frantic hands and pulled the girls toward the other door. "Go away," she said to Arthur, her voice shaking with a terrifying intensity. "I beg you, for my daughter's sake, just go away." She vanished through the service exit without looking back. Arthur was left alone in the windowless room, the smell of industrial disinfectant and the dim yellow glow of a single bulb his only company. He walked out of the station like a sleepwalker, the sun hitting his face with a sudden, blinding glare. He crossed the station forecourt not knowing where to go. Frederick's pound coin was gone from the ground. Someone else had picked it up. He sat down on the same bench, the only place he felt he still had a right to be. "Son, I brought you a coffee." Arthur opened his eyes slowly. An old man was standing in front of him, wearing a tweed jacket and a dark flat cap. He held 2 cardboard cups of steaming coffee in his hands. He had a face etched by years of sun and wind, bright blue eyes, and a small, effortless smile. "It's still hot. I just made it. I know you probably won't want to accept it, so I'll just tell you it's already paid for. If you don't drink it, I have to throw it away, and I hate wasting good coffee." Arthur reached out and took the cup. The heat burned his fingers slightly, but it was an honest, grounding heat. "Thank you," he whispered. "The name's Barnaby. Barnaby Wickham, at your service." The old man sat down at the other end of the bench, not asking for permission, but not invading Arthur's space either. "I own the newsstand by the side entrance. I've spent 40 years in this station, watching people come and go. I've seen a lot, but I've seen very little like what happened today." Arthur took a sip. The coffee was simple, a bit too strong, and scalding. It was the best thing he had tasted in years. "Mr. Wickham, you don't have to explain anything to me. I know who you are, Mr. Vance." Arthur looked up slowly. "I knew your father," Barnaby said, looking out at the passing taxis. "Many years ago, when he was still young and used to walk through here every morning. He was a good man, your father. He kept his feet on the ground. I suppose you inherited too much, too soon. Sometimes, son, inheriting a fortune is the worst thing that can happen to a man, because he starts to believe the world wins itself, and he forgets that you have to win it one step at a time. Saying hello to people as you go?" Arthur nodded, feeling a strange authority in the old man's gentle voice. "Mr. Wickham, that woman, Mrs. Carter. Do you know her?" Barnaby smiled a tired, knowing smile. "I know her well. Since she first arrived in this city, with 2 babies in her arms and eyes red from not sleeping. And I knew a young man before her many years ago who used to come here every morning to read a book before knocking on the doors of the big firms. A thin lad with a blue notebook always under his arm. Does the notebook sound familiar, Mr. Vance?" Arthur felt a tremor in his hand. That young man, his name was Julian. Julian Carter. The name fell like a stone into a quiet pond. Arthur Vance remembered him instantly, with a clarity he hadn't possessed in a decade. A morning long ago, his new office, his new company, everything new. A young man, poorly dressed but neat, standing at the door. A blue notebook under his arm. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. I know I don't have a university degree, but I am good with numbers. Just give me 1 week. If I'm not useful, I'll leave without a word." Arthur had given him that week. That young man had discovered a calculation error in 5 days that saved the company thousands of pounds. After 1 week, he became a permanent hire. After 10 years, Julian Carter was his most trusted accountant. The man who signed the balances, the man who knew where every penny was until the morning he didn't show up for work. "The whole company said he had stolen money," Arthur muttered, more to himself than to Barnaby. "They said it was a fraud, that he was an ingrate." "And did you believe the company, son?" Barnaby asked, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "I believed Frederick Lawson. He was the first one to present the evidence in every meeting." "And why did you believe him?" Arthur fell silent, searching for the answer. He realized with a pang of guilt that he hadn't looked for the truth, because the lie was more convenient. "Because I didn't want to think about it," he finally admitted. "Because it hurt, and it was easier to hate him than to miss him." "That," Barnaby said, "is something I understood at your age too. But I'm an old man now, and I've learned something you should know before it's too late. Almost always the man who is most insistent on blaming someone else is the one who most needs to hide." Arthur closed his eyes. Barnaby stood up, placing a brief, heavy hand on Arthur's shoulder. "If you want, son, you can sleep in the little room behind my kiosk tonight. I haven't used it in years. There's a clean mattress and a key. The key is yours until you decide what you are going to do." Arthur looked up, stunned. "Mr. Wickham, I can't. Don't say anything yet. Just sit, drink your coffee, and open that notebook. Look at it closely. The important things are never seen on the first attempt." Arthur drank the rest of the coffee and opened the notebook. The first page had a small drawing of a modest house with 2 cribs side by side and a woman sitting in a chair holding 2 babies at once. Underneath was the phrase, "My whole world in a single embrace." The second page was filled with numbers, rows and rows of them. At first glance, they looked like school exercises, but Arthur, who had spent 30 years reading balance sheets, saw immediately what they really were. They were bank movements, disguised and coded as small additions and subtractions that meant nothing individually, but together they formed patterns. The company had suspected a large embezzlement years ago. Arthur remembered the audit, the weeks of revision, and the fact that nothing conclusive was found. Julian Carter had found something, and he had written it there, in a child's notebook where no one would ever think to look. The third page had a photo taped to it, a young Julian smiling next to Lily. She didn't have red hands then, and he had the expression of a man seeing the whole future for the first time. On the edge of the photo, scribbled by hand, was another name and a warning. "FL Panama accounts. If anything happens to me, it's all here." Arthur felt a cold sweat run down his back. He turned the 4th page, the 5th, and the 6th. On the 7th page, there was a small, folded letter addressed in a neat hand. "For my daughters, for when they are grown and want to know why Daddy wasn't there." Arthur closed the notebook. He felt he had no right to read those private words. He sat for a long time, watching the commuters pass by, thinking about things he had ignored for a decade. He thought about how Frederick, after Julian's disappearance, had started taking on more responsibility. He thought about how, over the following years, Frederick had become indispensable. He thought about the meeting 3 nights ago, where Frederick had presented the proof of Arthur's own illegal dealings, emails, and contracts that Arthur now realized must have been forged. He thought about Catherine, who had been having lunch with Frederick long before the company fell. Arthur Vance, sitting on a station bench, realized he had been a rich man for years, but a fool for much longer. He stood up, but this time he wasn't looking at what he had lost. He was looking at what he had to do. That night, he slept in the small room behind the kiosk. Barnaby had left him a clean blanket and a light bulb that turned on with a string. The mattress smelled of dust, but it was dry and quiet. Arthur didn't sleep much. He spent most of the hours with the notebook open on his lap, deciphering Julian's codes. The small sums were dates, the products were amounts, and the subtractions indicated transfers out of the country. Every drawing of the girls hidden between the pages hid a numerical key beneath it. Julian had been far more brilliant than Arthur had ever appreciated, and he had been infinitely more loyal. When Arthur stepped out of the room the next morning, the city was just beginning to wake up, smelling of fresh bread and cold exhaust. He walked over to the kiosk where Barnaby was already opening boxes of newspapers. "Did you sleep, son? Enough. And I know what I have to do." "Good. What do you need?" "A phone call, Mr. Wickham." Barnaby handed him the old landline phone. Arthur dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 days, a number he knew by heart. "Harold?" "Good morning," Arthur said when the line picked up. "Who is this?" "It's me, Harold. It's Arthur." There was a long silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Arthur! I've been trying to find you." "I went to the house, but Catherine said—" "Never mind. Where are you?" "Harold, I need to see you today. Arthur, I believed in you from the start, but the evidence. I need the best lawyer I know and the oldest friend I have. I need both." But more than that, Harold, I need you to believe one more thing. Julian Carter never stole a penny. Frederick Lawson buried him, and I have the proof. Harold took a few seconds to respond, but when he did, Arthur knew he had an ally. Tell me where you are. I'm coming right now. Arthur hung up the phone. Barnaby smiled. Coffee, son? Before he gets here? Mr. Wickham, this time, it's on me. Or it will be very soon. That, Barnaby said, is the first piece of good news I've heard in years. Harold Goodman arrived 30 minutes later. He was a few years older than Arthur, balding, with the sparkling eyes of a lawyer who loved impossible cases. He carried a worn leather briefcase and a look of grim determination. He sat on the bench next to Arthur. All right, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Arthur told him everything from Julian's disappearance to the meeting at the station, the coin on the ground, and the blue notebook. Harold turned each page slowly, his professional fingers steady, but his face changed as he went. When he reached the page about the Panama accounts, he looked up. Arthur, if this is real, this isn't just about getting your company back. This is criminal. This is prison for Frederick Lawson. I know, but it's also dangerous. If Frederick did all this, he's already moving assets and silencing witnesses. We have to move fast. You need someone on the inside, Harold said. Someone who can confirm these notebook entries against the official records. I have someone, Julian's wife. She has to know more. She has to know where Julian is. Harold hesitated. Arthur, if she disappeared with her daughters and won't talk to you, there's a reason. She might not know either. She might have spent 5 years believing her husband abandoned them. Arthur felt a pang of guilt. Then she deserves the truth more than anyone. I have to find her. You can't go looking like you did yesterday, Harold noted. Not with a stained suit and desperation. You go as Arthur Vance, the man her husband respected. You go to ask, not to demand. Harold made a few calls, and within an hour, he had arranged for a hotel room and a change of clothes. While Arthur bathed and changed, Harold's team began verifying the notebook's data. That afternoon, Arthur returned to the station. He waited at the side entrance where he knew Lily would finish her shift. Barnaby saw him pass and gave him a small nod of encouragement. After an hour, Lily appeared, her bag over her shoulder and her daughters in tow. The twins saw him first. Mummy, it's the Candyman! Mummy, he's back! Lily stopped in her tracks, her grip on their hands tightening. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice wary. Mrs. Carter, I apologize for bothering you. I'm not here to cause trouble. Arthur pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a photocopy of one of the notebook pages. I came to give you this. It's a page from the notebook. Julian left proof of what Frederick Lawson did. I believed the lies years ago, and because of that, your husband was blamed for a crime he didn't commit. I want to fix what I broke, not for me, but for Julian. Lily looked at the paper, her eyes filling with tears. I already knew he was innocent, she whispered. I've known it for 5 years. But no one listens to a cleaning lady with 2 babies. No one. I'm listening now, Arthur said firmly. I want to take this to the press, to the board, and to the police, but I need your permission to speak for Julian. Lily looked at her daughters, then back at Arthur. If you are playing a game with us, Mr. Vance, I will never forgive you. My daughters have lost enough. I give you my word, Arthur replied. I will defend his name until the end. That night, in Harold's office, they sat in front of several computer monitors. Harold had brought in his nephew, Ian, a brilliant financial analyst. Ian had the notebook open next to his keyboard, crossing the data with the company's public records. This is genius, Ian said, his eyes glued to the screen. Every drawing in the notebook, every flower, every sun, every little house marks a specific transaction. The position of the signature on the drawing tells you the date. It's a code. And it shows a pattern of small transfers over 10 years into a shell company in Panama. The beneficiary is Frederick Lawson. Arthur felt a chill. The total amount stolen over a decade was nearly identical to the value of the contract Arthur had signed just before his fall. Frederick had been draining the company for years and then framed Arthur for the final largest missing sum. "But there's more," Ian said, turning the screen. "On the last page, there's a personal account number in Julian's name. It was opened 5 years ago and had a small deposit made into it just 3 months ago." Arthur sat up straight. "A deposit? From where?" "A small coastal town in the north. It's a monthly maintenance payment, but the receiving account was frozen by a court order during the fraud investigation. The money is just sitting there in limbo. Someone has been trying to send money to Lily for 5 years, but it never reached her." Arthur looked at Harold. "He's alive. Julian is alive." The press conference was set for 11 o'clock the following morning on the steps of the Vance and Lawson headquarters. Harold had made the necessary calls, and the media had arrived out of sheer curiosity. The fallen tycoon making a public statement was a story too good to pass up. Frederick Lawson watched from the 22nd floor window, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Let him sink himself," he muttered to the empty room. Catherine sat nearby, but she wasn't smiling. She hadn't slept well. A nagging feeling of dread settling in her gut. Down on the steps, Arthur stepped up to the microphone. He wore a simple suit. No gold watch, no silk handkerchief. Beside him stood Lily Carter, looking dignified despite her nervousness. "My name is Arthur Vance," he began, his voice echoing across the plaza. 3 days ago, I was removed from my company on charges of fraud. Today, I am here not to talk about what I lost, but about what we all lost 5 years ago. A man named Julian Carter was framed for a crime he didn't commit. I have the proof here, in this blue notebook written by Julian himself and preserved by his family." The cameras flashed incessantly as Arthur explained the coded drawings and the Panama accounts. Frederick Lawson didn't just steal money, he stole a man's life and a family's future. He buried the truth, but he forgot that the truth has a way of staying alive. The crowd erupted as Harold distributed copies of the evidence. Lily stepped forward, her voice clear. "I spent 5 years cleaning floors to feed my daughters because no one believed a thief's wife. My husband didn't run away with money. He was forced into hiding to protect us. Today, I'm not just a cleaning lady. I am the wife of an innocent man." The media swarm was intense. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Vance, do you know where Julian Carter is?" Arthur looked at the cameras. "I have reason to believe he is alive and under protection, and I am calling on the authorities to reopen his case immediately and release the funds that have been frozen for 5 years. In the office above, Frederick's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He grabbed his phone to call his lawyers, but it was too late. The lobby was already filling with police officers. He tried to walk out, but he was met by investigators at the elevator. Catherine watched him being led away in handcuffs, her world of luxury vanishing as quickly as Arthur's had. Downstairs, the atmosphere was electric. Arthur felt a weight lifting off his shoulders, but it wasn't the weight of the company. It was the weight of his own blindness. He looked at Lily and saw the tears of relief on her face. "We did it," she whispered. "No, Lily," Arthur replied. "Julian did it. We just finally learned how to read." The news of the scandal broke across every major network. The Blue Notebook became a national symbol of resilience and the hidden intelligence of the working class. Arthur was reinstated as chairman, but he didn't return to his penthouse. Instead, he stayed in a modest hotel near the station. He spent his days working with the police and the auditors to untangle the web of Frederick's lies. A week later, he received a call from Harold. "Arthur, you need to come to the office. Someone is here." When Arthur arrived, he saw a man standing by the window. He was thinner than in the photos, his hair flecked with gray, but the eyes were unmistakable. Julian Carter turned around, his face a map of the 5 years he had spent in a quiet, lonely exile. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice trembling. "Julian." Arthur didn't shake his hand. He pulled him into a brief, fierce embrace. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry it took me so long." "You found the notebook," Julian said. "That's all that matters. My daughters. Can I see them?" The reunion took place at the station, on the same bench where Arthur had sat in despair. Arthur watched from a distance as Julian stood waiting. Then Lily appeared with grace and hope. The girls stopped for a second, looking at the man they only knew from a drawing and a letter. Julian knelt down, his arms wide open. "Poppy?" Grace whispered. "Yes, my loves. It's me." The twins launched themselves at him, and the three of them became a single, sobbing knot of joy. Lily stood over them, her hands on Julian's shoulders, her face glowing with a light that Arthur hadn't seen before. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated humanity that no amount of money could ever buy. Arthur turned away, giving them their privacy. He walked over to Barnaby's kiosk. "They look good together, don't they?" Barnaby said, handing him a coffee. "The best thing I've ever seen, Barnaby." In the months that followed, Arthur transformed the Vance and Lawson Group. He renamed it the Vance and Carter Foundation, focusing on ethical business practices and support for families in crisis. Frederick Lawson was sentenced to several years in prison, and his assets were seized to repay the stolen funds. Catherine moved away, disappearing into a quiet life in the countryside. Arthur sold his luxury cars and his penthouse, using the money to seed the foundation. He kept only the gold watch, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder of where he came from. He became a regular at the station, often sitting on the bench to talk to travelers or share a coffee with Barnaby. He realized that his fall had been the most fortunate event of his life. It had stripped away the illusions of power and left him with something far more valuable, a connection to the world around him. One Sunday afternoon, Arthur invited the Carters to his new apartment for dinner. He had learned to cook nothing fancy, but honest meals. Lily brought a dessert she had made, and Julian brought a new book he was reading. The twins brought their own notebooks, filled with new drawings of their father and their friend Arthur. "Arthur," Julian said during dinner, "why did you do it? You could have just cleared your own name and left us out of it." Arthur looked at the twins, who were busy drawing a picture of the station. "Because for 30 years I looked at people without seeing them, Julian. I looked at you for 10 years and never saw the man you were. I didn't want to be that man anymore. I'd rather be the man who gets a strawberry candy from a child than the man who owns a tower but has no friends." They laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. As the years passed, the story of Arthur Vance and the Blue Notebook became a legend in the city. It was taught in business schools as a lesson in ethics, but more importantly, it was told in the streets as a story of hope. Arthur lived a long, full life, never regaining his former billions, but possessing a wealth of respect and love that was immeasurable. He remained close to the Carters, becoming an honorary grandfather to Grace and Hope. He saw them grow into brilliant young women, both of whom pursued careers in social justice. And every morning, until he was too old to walk the distance, he went to the station, bought a newspaper from Barnaby's successor, and sat on the bench for a few minutes, remembering the day a single-pound coin and a strawberry candy changed the world. The final lesson of Arthur's life was one he often shared with the young interns at the foundation. He would sit them down and tell them the story of the station bench. "True wealth," he would say, "is not found in the numbers on a screen or the height of a building. It is found in the ability to look another human being in the eye and recognize their dignity regardless of the clothes they wear or the job they do." He understood that we are all just one bad day away from being the person on the bench and one act of kindness away from being the person who saves them. He learned that the most important things in life are often the ones we overlook. The loyalty of an honest employee, the wisdom of an old man in a kiosk, and the unfiltered compassion of a child. Arthur Vance died peacefully, leaving behind a legacy of integrity that far outweighed the empire he had once lost. To truly understand the value of a human life, one must first learn to see the people who have become invisible to society. We often walk through our daily lives focused on our own goals, our own pressures, and our own ambitions, failing to notice the hands that clean our offices, the faces that serve our coffee, or the silent struggles of those who work alongside us. Dignity is not a status that is granted by a title or a bank balance. It is an inherent right that we must acknowledge in every person we meet. When we lose our empathy, we lose our own humanity, becoming trapped in a gilded cage of our own making. Arthur's journey from the heights of power to a cold station bench was not a tragedy but a liberation, for it was only in his poverty that he found his soul. As we grow older, we realize that the memories that sustain us are not the contracts we signed or the rivalries we won, but the moments when we chose to be kind when it wasn't required. We remember the people who stood by us when the world turned away, and the small gestures that gave us the strength to keep going. A single candy offered by a child can hold more power than $1 million investment if it is given with a heart that knows no prejudice. The world is built on these small threads of connection, and it is our responsibility to weave them together with honesty and respect. We must teach our children that brilliance without character is a hollow pursuit, and that the greatest success is to be a person whom others can trust when the shadows fall. If there is one thing to carry away from the story of the Blue Notebook, it is that truth has a quiet, persistent strength that can outlast any lie. It may take years, and it may require a fallen man and a little girl to find it, but it will eventually emerge. We should live our lives in a way that prepares us for that emergence, ensuring that our actions are ones we would be proud to see written in a notebook for our children to read. For in the end, we are not defined by what we took from the world, but by what we gave back to it in its moments of need. True power is the ability to lift another person up, and true wisdom is knowing that in doing so, we are actually lifting ourselves.